The teaching text tonight is from Psalm 73, a psalm of Asaph. Surely God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. But as for me, my feet had almost slipped. I had nearly lost my foothold. For I envied the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. They have no struggles. Their bodies are healthy and strong. They are free from common human burdens. They are not plagued by human ills. Therefore, pride is their necklace. They clothe themselves with violence. From their callous hearts comes iniquity. Their evil imaginations have no limits. They scoff and speak with malice. With arrogance they threaten oppression. Their mouths lay claim to heaven, and their tongues take possession of the earth. Therefore, their people turn to them and drink up waters in abundance. They say, how would God know? Does the Most High know anything? This is what the wicked are like. Always free of care, they go on amassing wealth. Surely in vain I have kept my heart pure and have washed my hands in innocence. All day long I've been afflicted, and every morning brings new punishments. If I had spoken out like that, I would have betrayed your children. When I tried to understand all this, it troubled me deeply till I entered the sanctuary of God. Then I understood their final destiny. Surely you place them on slippery ground. You cast them down to ruin. How suddenly are they destroyed, completely swept away by terrors. They are like a dream when one awakes. When you arise, Lord, you will despise them as fantasies. When my heart was grieved and my spirit embittered, I was senseless and ignorant. I was a brute beast before you. Yet I am always with you. You hold me by my right hand. You guide me with your counsel, and afterward you will take me into glory. Whom have I in heaven but you? And earth has nothing I desire besides you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. Those who are far from you will perish. You destroy all who are unfaithful to you. But as for me, it is good to be near God. I have made the sovereign Lord my refuge. I will tell of all your deeds. This is the word of the Lord.
Can anyone remember what I preached on last week? What was that? Pray what you've got. Yes. Thank you. Sometimes I don't even remember what I preached last week, so pray what you've got. This week, I have a very, very simple talk. Attention leads to adoration. Attention leads to adoration. A couple of years ago, I realized that there was something wrong with me. And it was around the area of concentration. I have historically been someone with a very, very strong sense of focus. I wouldn't call myself anybody who's ever had ADD or anything like that. But I began to notice these little clues or these little habits and behaviors that had shifted in my life. They began to pop up in all these different areas. Area number one, I couldn't sit through a movie anymore without checking my phone. Now, I don't like to watch mini movies, and I try and save them up for when I'm, on holidays or whatever. But I would get to these documentaries I've been so anxious to watch, and halfway through I'd be like, I need to check the Instagram, see what's going on. And so I would stop it, the documentary, or I'd zone out for a bit, or I'd take a break and get on social media and piddle around, and then I'd get back and I'd finish the documentary. The same thing would happen with movies that everybody was like, you have to see this movie. And I'd get 20 minutes into it, and sometimes it'd be like I couldn't pay attention long enough, or I just was bored with the plot and I wouldn't finish the film. This is the first time in my life I was like, I just can't be bothered finishing it. I don't care who's straight out of Compton. I can't get into it. But then I began to realize that this was showing up in my reading. I used to be able to read whole books in one sitting. In fact, it was one of the things that people would mock me and my family about incessantly. How many books did you read today, Dad? But it would get to the point where I would not be able to finish a chapter because I just felt compelled halfway through or 20 minutes in that I just felt compelled to see what was happening on Facebook. It felt so urgent, so real, so pressing that I had to stop. And then eventually this bled and made its way into my time with God. And this is when I really thought, something's wrong with me. Our church follows a Bible reading plan where for people with short attention spans who can't read big chunks of the Bible, they chop it up into little bits. So over the course of 1 year, you can read it. And I knew I had a problem when I couldn't make it through the chopped up bit for people with short attention spans to read the Bible. And it began to really concern me. What is happening to me? Something has fundamentally changed. Now, I knew that distantly that attention spans were shrinking and that sort of thing, but it had never experienced that personally. And I realized that my attention was being stolen from me. So I began to do some research. I came across a book by a guy named Nicholas Carr. This is a Pulitzer Prize nominated book. He's the author of this book called The Shallows. And in this book, I don't know if you've read it, but it's even now it's just a touch dated, but the principles are true. That something is shifting in our attention spans. This is what he writes. He says, "What the net seems to be doing is chipping away my capacity for concentration and contemplation. Whether I'm online or not, my mind now expects to take in information the way the net distributes it in a swiftly moving stream of particles. Once I was a scuba diver in a sea of words. Now I zip along the surface like a guy in a jet ski." Now maybe you've noticed this in your own life. You used to be able to read a 2,000-word article, and now you can't read a half-page blog post. It's like you're skimming it, and you're like, I get it, next. He goes on and he tells in this book about attending a Phi Beta Kappa meeting where Duke University professor Catherine Hayes confessed, "I can't get my students to read whole books anymore." And she's talking about students studying literature. "I can't get people who study books to read books anymore. Something's happened in their attention spans." This is happening in our society. By the way, is it just because I'm middle-aged, or are you feeling this too? You feel this? Am I on my own here? You're like, dude, that is you. You're like, it's you. They talk about the fourth screen, as we've repeatedly seen over the last 100 years. Technology introduces and disrupts habits. So at first it was the newspaper. If you study the history of the newspaper was basically designed to distract people's attentions, and the development of the modern newspaper was an attempt to hijack people's attention spans. That moved on to evening broadcasts, where people would gather around a little box called the radio that was putting out sounds. It ultimately made its way to the television set, where people would gather around at key intervals with a family rhythm of watching the television. It made its way ultimately to the third screen, which was the computer screen, email. But now we're at the fourth screen, where the computer screen before you had to sit down and be with it. Now the fourth screen says it's with us everywhere we go. This has changed our lives. One author, in terms of capturing our attention, describes this as the equivalent of fracking, which is mining for reservoirs that were previously unreachable but now can be accessed and harvested. And now the fourth screen is with us everywhere we go. There's the fracking of the modern attention span, where even the smallest moments of our lives are being harvested. We're being targeted, we're being tracked, the algorithms are after us. So the big thesis of my talk, it's very simple. Distraction leads to disillusionment, and attention leads to adoration. And the reason I'm talking about this when it's connected to prayer, when I sit with people who really want to walk with Jesus, people who really, they're like, teach us to pray, man. This is my series. I resolve, like you said last week, to pray what I've got. But when I pray what I've got, I'm like, dear God, and then I forgot what comes after that because I got distracted. So I try to pray what I've got, but all I've got is distractions. People just can't seem to pay attention anymore. And the most sincere people say, honestly, when I try and get in the presence of God to read the Bible, I just can't concentrate. So rather than talking about contending for revival, rather than talking about breakthrough prayer, I just want to talk about learning to pay attention to where God's moving. Because if you can't pay attention, the rest of it is theory. The root complaint I get, I just can't concentrate. I can't pay attention. God seems distant. The science of attention is important if we're going to move on with this and really grasp attention leading to adoration, because basically attention is about monitoring our short-term memory. We have limited short-term memory, and all the time our brain is processing through these systems to try and determine what am I going to dump out because I have limited RAM, and then what am I going to convert to long-term memory, which makes its way basically into our hard drive. So for an example, if I was to put a phone number on the screen right now, and to get you to memorize it, so I'll give you a minute to memorize a number and then ask you 3 minutes later, most of you could probably recount it. But late tonight at 11:30, if I was to text you and to say, what was that number again? Most of you would be like, that's God, man. Your brain has determined that that random number is not important. Now, I want you to imagine that there's a person you've been interested in for 3 years and they give you their number. And I was to ask you later tonight, what's the number? You'd be like, let me tell you. Because your brain would impute meaning to it and it would be converted to long-term memory. You'd hold on to it. And that's the science of our attention. The brain is basically trying to determine, what do I just keep for now and what do I keep for the long term? And so in the modern attention economy, which is being mined as a commodity, the basic goal is to take captive our short-term attention and to convert it to long-term loyalty to products and corporations and ideas and people. So how do I wake you up and get you now? But then how do I convert that over time to long-term allegiance? That is the attention economy. So Ben Parr, in his book Captivology, which is a fascinating book, says this about the process. First, you need to elicit a reaction by being distinctive or disruptive. And once you have your audience's immediate attention, you need something unique, novel, or useful to keep their working memory focused on your message. And having secured their short-term attention, you must create value for your audience to capture their long-term attention. And so in this book, which is a fascinating book, he gives these 7 triggers to try and wake people up and then convert their memory to loyalty. The automaticity trigger, using specific sensory clues like color, symbols, and sounds to capture attention based on automatic reaction to stimuli. The framing trigger, adapting or changing somebody's view of the world so they pay more attention to you. The disruption trigger, violating people's expectations to change what they pay attention to. The reward trigger, leveraging people's motivations for intrinsic and extrinsic rewards. Reputation trigger, using the reputation of experts, authorities, and the crowd to instill trust and captivate audiences. The mystery trigger, creating mystery, uncertainty, and suspense to keep an audience intrigued until the very end. And the acknowledgement trigger, fostering a deeper connection because people tend to pay attention to those who provide them with validation and understanding. And the book is how to leverage that to get people to do what you want. Now, what's this got to do with prayer? Well, in this passage tonight, the context of this passage, Psalm 73, is Asaph. Asaph is one of the official worship leaders around the time of King David, and he was employed to lead the people of God from the distractions of everyday life into the presence of God, to get their eyes off the things of earth and to get their eyes onto him. He was a skilled worship leader. He wrote quite a few of the Psalms, some of the most popular Psalms, the Psalms attributed to Asaph, the worship leader. But in this Psalm here, Psalm 73, he gets distracted. In this Psalm, he gets his eyes off of God. And when he does that, he basically falls into a cycle. And the reason we're teaching through this tonight is because I think it's the same cycle that many of us experience when we get our eyes off of the right things. When we get distracted, it leads us to disillusionment. And I use this psalm because if one of the official skilled worship leaders who wrote a psalm that's in the Bible got distracted, then it should be encouraging for you that you're not that bad. And then when he gets his eyes back on God and moves from a place of disillusionment to adoration, it provides us with a pathway of how to get back on track with God. So distraction leads to disillusionment, but attention leads to adoration. So let's look at this first cycle. Distraction leads to disillusionment. Look at what it says, Psalm 73, verse 2. But as for me, my feet almost slipped. I nearly lost my foothold, for I envied the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. Now, he's a worship leader. His life is basically consistent of liturgies and songs and praise before the one true God. But somehow he either got bored with that or the routine got exhausting. And all of a sudden, instead of getting his eyes on God and keeping his eyes on the task at hand, he begins to contemplate the arrogant and the wicked. And he describes it as almost slipping. What happens in his heart when he gets distracted? Envy for other people's lives creeps into his heart. We live in a culture that is conspiring to distract us, to create envy in our heart. And it does it through disrupting that first stage of attention, waking us up. These triggers are working to get us to pay attention. And it's always the sensational and the controversial and the emotional. When you have a 24-hour news cycle, everything is a crisis and a drama. Name a time you've ever tuned into the news and it's like, well, folks, honestly, pretty uneventful day on planet Earth. A lot to be grateful for. We're just going to call it. Spend time with your families. Out. Have you ever seen that? Now, everything's a crisis. Everything's a drama. Everything has a live reporter. Everything has opinions and commentary and opponents and arguments and immediacy and urgency. Everything. And so we're always feeling like we're being distracted. We're always feeling like we're pulled out of our normal lives into giant crises that are around us. And if it's not a crisis, it's something that we desire. Something that we envy. We get pulled out of our lives into envying other people's lives. This distraction, the influence of our consciousness away from the things of God to the things of the earth, then leads to the point where we're not just looking at the wrong thing, we begin to be distorted by what we're giving our attention to. Distraction leads to distortion. You don't see clearly, you don't see properly. Subtly, your values and your perspective and your heart is gently seduced away from what really matters. Look at what he says in verse 4, talking about the wicked now. They have no struggles, as if that's true. Their bodies are healthy and strong, Kardashian. They are free from common human burdens. They're not plagued by human ills. Therefore, pride's their necklace. They clothe themselves with violence. From their callous hearts comes iniquity. Their evil imaginations have no limits. They scoff and speak with malice. With arrogance, they threaten oppression. Their mouths lay claim to heaven, and their tongues take possession of the earth. Giant claims. Therefore, their people turn to them and drink up waters in abundance. Isn't that true? Now, that's not true that people have no struggles, that everybody who's wealthy and godless is healthy and strong and they're free from common human burdens and they're not plagued by human ills. But when you get your eyes off God and the cost of discipleship and you look at how easy everybody else's life seems, your vision begins to get distorted. And that's the number one goal of the enemy getting our eyes off God, is to distort our awareness and our values about life. And sometimes the distortion can be strong and urgent, and sometimes it can just be subtle, the slow seduction of our view of the world. I can't think of another category of life, if you were to use the word binging, where people would applaud you for doing it, other than binge watching TV. I'm a binge eater. Fantastic, man. I'm a binge drinker. Congratulations. But what are you doing this weekend? Dude, just going to binge Handmaid's Tale Season 2. Just going to binge it. Oh, awesome. I was having a conversation with one of my local baristas, and I just said to him, "Oh, how's it going, man? Yeah, pretty good. What's the summer got on?" "Ah, yeah, just working a bunch. Great." It's like, "Well, what are you doing tomorrow?" And he goes, "Oh, tomorrow's my Netflix day." I was like, "Wow, you've dedicated a day to a." I do the Sabbath, you do the Netflix day. And he's like, "Yeah, man, I'm just going to binge a season of something." I thought, man, that's so fascinating, because so much of our life vision is formed by what we give our attention to. So give an example. If I was to say to you, hey, what would happen if you served the poor for 12 hours a week? Like you're in close contact with the poor. You saw them, you helped them, you heard their stories. Would that impact you? Would that shape you in any way? Yeah, it would. What if you were to develop a skill? You took a class to learn something for 12 hours a week. Over the course of time, would that form you? You'd be, oh yeah, your skill acquisition would be incredible. What if you sit in front of a screen for 12 hours and just let somebody tell you and seduce your imagination? No power, powerless. A Netflix poll found 61% defined their viewing style as binge watching, which meant 2 to 6 episodes at a sitting. Like someone earlier was like, I don't binge watch. I was all defensive, and then I was like, oh, I binge watch. Grant McCracken, a cultural anthropologist paid by Netflix to investigate and promote the habit, reported that TV viewers are no longer zoning out as a way to forget about their day. They're tuning in on their own schedule to a different world. Getting immersed in multiple episodes or even multiple seasons of a show over a few weeks is a new kind of escapism. It's especially welcome today. We get our eyes off the things of God, and then we put our eyes on the things of the world, and we begin to be distorted in our understanding of how life works. So one cultural commentator, Andrew Romano, says this: after watching Game of Thrones for a mere 30 seconds, my brain begins to produce the alpha waves typically associated with hazy receptive states of consciousness, which are also generated during the light hypnotic stage of suggestion therapy. At the same time, my neurological activity switches from the left hemisphere to the right, that is, from the seat of logical thought to the seat of emotion. Whenever this shift takes place, my body is flooded with the natural opiates known as endorphins, which explains why viewers have repeatedly told scientists they feel relaxed as soon as they switch on the television, and also why this same sense of relaxation tends to dissolve immediately after the set is turned off. So you can imagine Asaph, who's a worship leader, who gets his eyes off God, and then he's just like, stuff it, binges a few seasons of The Sopranos or something, I don't know, 13 Reasons Why, I don't know. And then he's just beginning to get his vision of life distorted, which ultimately leads to the next stage, which is discouragement. Verse 11, they say, how would God know? Does the Most High know anything? And this is what the wicked are like. They're always free of care. They go on amassing wealth. And then he says, surely in vain I've kept my heart pure and washed my hands in innocence. All day long I've been afflicted, and every morning brings new punishments. And so what's his response? He's like, literally like, what's the point, man? I look around me. Everybody who's not following God seems to be happy. All of my friends just sleeping around, partying, swiping the right direction, hooking. They look like they're having a better time. And I'm trying to like follow Jesus and do the right thing. And I'm miserable and lonely. What's the point? Or my career, you talk about like not making my career my God. But what do I do when I'm not working? Be at home, lonely, binge watching? At least I'm getting paid more and advancing. Like you get discouraged in your spirit, and it feels like it's not worth it because your vision's been distorted because you've been distracted by the things of the world. And that ultimately leads to a point where people are tempted to disobedience. When you're encouraged, when you're just in a spirit of faith and joy, you're not tempted to sin. Your ability to resist is like, I'm not interested. But when you're beat down and you're discouraged, sin comes along, you're just like, okay. What you would never do in a spirit of faith, you give up in a spirit of discouragement. Sexuality and relationships, finances and lifestyle, sharing our faith with other people, making idols out of career without boundaries. This leads to disobedience. He says this: when my heart was grieved and my spirit was embittered, I was senseless and ignorant. I was like a brute beast before you. And this is a fascinating passage because this is a worship leader talking. Instead of being caught up in the presence of God, I'm running on animal instinct out of discouragement. Raw reaction. What do I want? How do I feel? Let me medicate. And this leads to a point of disobedience, which ultimately leads to disillusionment. Look at what it says in verse 16. When I try to understand all this, it troubled me deeply. Look at the intensity of this language: a bitter spirit, deep trouble, a lack of peace. And so I want you to see this. You see this through the passage when the psalmist got his eyes off God and off his call and was distracted by the lifestyles of the wicked. It ultimately led to a point of disillusionment. Next slide here. By the way, I hand drew these in Etsy style, so it was authentic. So I hope you appreciate that. Distraction leads to distortion. Distortion leads to discouragement. Discouragement leads to disobedience. Disobedience leads to disillusionment. And the only way to break this cycle is to distract yourself with something else. As this becomes like a cycle of people's lives. Look, I'm not here to beat you down tonight. I am not here to condemn you. I want to see you walk in freedom and joy. But I just want to maybe help diagnose something I noticed beginning in me that I'm sure is happening in other people, and to say that God has something better for us than this. Some of you right now, I was praying earlier, I had this very strong impression. Some of you, out of discouragement through distraction, are in a state of disobedience. And even as I was going through this cycle, you're like, I'm disobeying God. And I just think tonight is an invitation for you out of your disobedience and into joy. So if you've compromised in some way that you know in your heart because you were discouraged, hear the voice of God saying, you can leave that cycle. Come back to me. It's hard not to, in a talk like this, quote Ronald Rolheiser, because he's just the best writer I've ever read on almost everything I've read. But he said this, and I want you to see this. Narcissism accounts for our heartache, pragmatism our headache, restlessness our insomnia, and constancy of all three together account for the fact that we are so habitually self-absorbed by heartache, headache, and greed for experience that we rarely find the time and space to be in touch with the deeper movements inside and around us. And he goes on and quotes a series of other authors all making this point. What each of these authors and countless others are saying is that we, for every kind of reason, good and bad, are distracting ourselves into spiritual oblivion. Next slide. It's not that we have anything against God and depth and spirit. We would like these. It's just that we're too habitually preoccupied to have any of these show up on our radar screens. We're more busy than bad, more distracted than non-spiritual, and more interested in the movie theater, the World Cup, shopping mall, fantasy life that they produce in us than we are in church. Pathological busyness, distraction, and restlessness are major blocks today within our spiritual lives. And so we've got to at least address this, because otherwise all summer long is going to feel like a beatdown. When we're talking about intercessory prayer, contending for others, you're going to be like, honestly, shut up. And I want this to be life-giving. I want to enter into the thing that's actually blocking you so it can open up and you can find life. You begin to grow in intimacy and understanding with God. Maybe you're here and you feel disconnected from reality. It seems so far away. So next slide here. This, I think, ends up being a key. That if you're going to do anything in your life to take a step towards God, you just got to be aware of distractions. You got to get a filter up. You got to be aware of this. When I realized that it was my phone that was basically having a tremendous impact on me, I brought the Apple Watch. Because Johnny Ives, in one ad that I saw, said that it helps you not be distracted. And I talked to my friends before I bought it, doing a bunch of research, and I was like, why did you buy the Apple Watch? And they're like, well, it basically tells you whether or not you should pull your phone out of your pocket. I was like, sweet. So one of the things I didn't understand is that the default setting is all notifications from your phone go to your wrist, even when your phone's not with you. So instead of it being in my pocket or on the bench where I could leave it now, I was like, zzz, like my wrist is like this. It's like, what are you doing? Like, nothing. Donald Trump's doing something again. It's like it's always on. So I had to very, very carefully go through and go app by app and ask myself the question, by what do I want to be interrupted or reminded? Where do I want my attention drawn? And we should all do this in our lives. We should have a moment we consciously ask, what am I allowing to capture my attention? How do I begin to do an audit of the notifications I'm letting in? And do I really need to know about these things? Otherwise, you're going to miss the miracle around you. There's a Jewish tradition that says that the splitting of the Red Sea was the greatest miracle ever performed. Yet we have one midrash that mentions two Israelites, Reuben and Shimon, who had a different experience. Apparently, the bottom of the sea, though safe to walk on, was not completely dry but a little muddy, like a beach at low tide. And so Reuben stepped into it and curled his lip. What is this mark? Shimon scowled. There's mud all over the place. This is just like the slime pits of Egypt, replied Reuben. What's the difference? Complained Shimon. Mud here, mud there, it's all the same. And so it went for the two of them, grumbling all the way across the bottom of the sea. Because they never once looked up, they never understood why on the distant shore everyone else was singing songs of praise. For Reuben and Shimon, the miracle never happened because they were focused on the minor distractions of the moment. They missed the drama of deliverance. Hebrews 2:1 says, we must pay the most careful attention, therefore, to what we've heard, so that we do not drift away. Drifting is such an interesting word, isn't it? You ever been to the beach, because it's 98 degrees today, ever been to the beach and then you're just splashing around, you're like, let's just go out and let's body surf or something. You're out, you're splashing around, it's awesome. You look up 20 minutes later and you're like, where am I? I'm in New Jersey. How did this happen to me? And how does it happen? Because you're just in the water doing your thing and the tide just carries you along and you just drift. You don't consciously set out. And isn't this a legitimate term that parents always say to their kids? Keep your eye on where we are. Because if you're not careful, you're going to end up a mile down the beach by doing nothing but enjoying yourself in the water. The current will take you. So we've got to pay careful attention so we don't drift away. Distraction leads to disillusionment. Then the good news is this, is that attention leads to adoration. The psalmist, in the middle of this lament, this cycle of despair, has a revelation that changes him. He shifts his attention, he shifts his perspective, and ultimately leads him into a new cycle. Attention leads to adoration. This is how Mary Oliver puts it. She says, attention is the beginning of devotion. Attention is the beginning of devotion. Matt Woodley highlights Jesus' emphasis on paying attention. He says, throughout his life, Jesus kept stating things like, stay alert, keep watching, don't fall asleep. As he approached his death, these reminders grew in frequency and intensity. Several examples. At one point, Jesus compared the time of his coming to the days of Noah when people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage. Obviously, Jesus wasn't anti-eating or anti-marriage. The problem was much deeper. When the flood finally came, no one saw it coming because they forgot to focus. So Jesus drove the point home by saying, therefore keep watch. So we have to get our attention fixed on the right things. Look at what it says in verse 15. If I had spoken out like that, I would have betrayed your children. When I tried to understand all of this, it troubled me deeply until I entered the sanctuary of God. And then I understood their final destiny. He gets distracted. Maybe he wasn't on the worship shift for a while. Maybe he was on a rotation where he was like on, and then he got vacation time. And he signs up and follows the wrong people online, and he's looking at their feeds, and he gets disillusioned, and envy comes in his heart. He's ultimately filled with bitterness, and he's like a brute beast, and then he gets back on his shift, and he comes back into the house of God. And when he's in, he's like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? It all became clear to him again. And this is why, in many ways, pastors are always like, stay connected to a local church. It's not because we need your attendance numbers. It's because you need your attention fixed on the right things. And it's amazing just how in the middle of New York City, when people believe so many other things, you just gather with God's people and you're like, I'm not insane. This is right. There's something powerful in stepping into the house of God. And when you do, attention begins to shift. I entered the sanctuary of God. Then I understood how this worked out. William James, we must reflect that when we reach the end of our days, our life experience will equal what we've paid attention to, whether by choice or default. That's what your life's going to be about. What you've paid attention to will be your life. So this then begs a question. If you kind of feel stuck and distant, how may God step into your life to get your attention? What would be some indicators that God's getting you out of that cycle of disillusionment? Well, the first one's not one that people like to talk about, but it's remarkably effective. It's called pain. C.S. Lewis's classic comment that pain is God's megaphone to rouse a deaf world gets used a lot, but it's true. And sometimes God disciplines his children because they're in a place where they're far from. And it's kind of like a wake-up call. The relationship breaks up. You get fired. You get a hard phone call. It's a health crisis. I don't know what it is, but something steps into your life and you're just like, what have I been doing? That, though hard, can be one of God's gifts where he's getting your attention. Richard Rohr says this, once we reach the age of 30, success has nothing to teach us. Success is fun and it's rewarding, but we don't learn anything new from it. It's not a bad friend, it's just a lousy teacher. The only thing that can teach us, that can get through to us and profoundly change us, is suffering, failure, loss, and wounds. So that's encouraging. But sometimes God will use pain to get our attention. Sometimes he will use beauty. Sometimes something will step into your life or you'll discover something and it just takes your breath away. What is that? Where did that come from? And it has a transcendent power to break you out of normalcy and to draw you into something deeper. And this is often the role of artists in our culture, not modern art, which is basically filled with bitterness, but true art. I'm just kidding, and it's not working. I'm just kidding, and it's not working. But art is designed to be a confrontation. It says, stop, 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 stop. Look, see, behold, there's something else. And that's honestly why when they discover that John Coltrane has an album that's been in a closet for 50 years and they put it out and you can listen to it, it's like the Holy Grail from heaven. Something transcendent breaks in. Sometimes God is kind and he uses beauty. But most of the time, God just tries to get our attention through the ordinary stuff of life. And when this happens, I think this is one of the greatest gifts. You ever have those moments where, I had this last night, it was so overwhelming. It was just a perfect summer night. And for 13 years on Saturday nights, I've prayed for revival in the same spot. And last night I was just sitting there praying for you, so it's good to see you. And you know those New York moments where the light is just right on the street and everyone's in a great mood. And you just feel like New York's the best place in the world. And the only thing you can say is, thank you. This is it. Those normal moments of transcendence. Or you get on a train and it's packed and someone stands up and you look for pregnant people and there's none. And you sit down, you're like, yes, for 24 stops. It's the small things. Finding God in the ordinary. Paying attention to our everyday life. This is a great gift. One author puts it this way, and I think this is interesting for the kind of church we're trying to be. The fact is, if we can't discern God's presence in our day-to-day lives, it's unlikely we'll find him at a revival. We may find a lot of excitement, great speakers, superb music, and maybe even some signs and wonders. But unless a person learns to find God as much in the ordinary as in the exciting will do nothing more than serve as a momentary distraction. And it's often true that you see people get very, very disillusioned after times of high spiritual excitement. So what we have to do when God begins to break into our lives like this is learn to turn aside and behold the glory. Respond to the invitation. God's like, I'm trying to get your attention. We need to turn aside. Now, this is how Lawrence Kushner put it. And he's commenting basically on Moses. Now, Moses' story is a fascinating story. Miraculous birth, raised in the household of Pharaoh, discovers his identity, murders an Egyptian, and for whatever reason, runs off into the desert. And he spends 40 years in obscurity thinking that God's done with him. 40 years as a shepherd in the middle of nowhere. 40 years leaving Wall Street and working at Walmart in the middle of Kentucky would kind of make you think that the call was over. But that's not what happens. One day, he sees a burning bush. Now, in the ancient Near East, particularly in the desert, sometimes these bushes would spontaneously combust because the chemicals in the trees and just the heat, they would just catch on fire. So it wasn't an uncommon thing to see a burning bush, but how long do you have to look at it before you realize, hey, that one's not burning up? And so Kushner says this, the burning bush was not a miracle, it was a test. God wanted to find out whether or not Moses could pay attention to something for more than a few minutes. When Moses did, God spoke. The trick is to pay attention to what's going on around you long enough to behold the miracle without falling asleep. There's another world right here within this one whenever we pay attention. So that's Kushner commenting on the Torah, and now let's have Ortberg commenting on Kushner, who was commenting on the Torah. Ortberg says this, Moses said, I must turn aside and look at this great sight and see why the bush is not burned up. Everything turned on Moses being willing to turn aside, to interrupt his daily routine, to pay attention to the presence of God. He didn't have to. He could have looked the other way, as many of us would. And he would have just missed the Exodus, the people of Israel, his calling, the reason for his existence. He would have missed knowing God. Moses had seen the shrub before, perhaps 100 times, only this time it was different, but he didn't miss it. He stopped, he turned aside. Moses was willing to stop and see the place where God was at work, and he marked it as holy by taking off his shoes. I want you to see this. This is a lot of us, particularly in the kind of theological tradition that we get in. We like to just note things and move on. But we don't see that moment of awakening, God getting our attention, is an invitation to an encounter. Not something to be shared in a group. How was your week? Well, I had this crazy moment. I'm sharing it in the group. No, it's an invitation from God into something. When God gets our attention, or when we give God our attention, it leads to an awareness. And look what it says, verse 20, Psalm 73. Surely you place them on slippery ground. You cast them down to ruin. How suddenly they are destroyed, currently completely swept away by terrors. They're like a dream when one awakes. When you arise, Lord, you will despise them as fantasies. Hang on a sec, what's gone to? Well, the wealthy and the wicked, they don't have common problems like human beings. There's no problems with, his early element, it's all gone now. He sees. He has total awareness of the reality of life. Good, evil, consequences, reaping, sowing, joy, sorrow. It's all come into focus because he's paying attention to the right thing. And then this sense of awareness ultimately leads to an acknowledgement of God. Look at what he says. Yes, I am always with you. You hold me by my right hand. You guide me with your counsel. And afterward, you will take me into glory. Before he's like, where are you, God? What's the point in serving you? What's the point in purifying my heart? What's the point of restraining my desires from the evil? And yet, when he gets this acknowledgement of the reality of God, what does he say? You will, you will, you will, you will. Instead of, I don't get to, it's not fair, look at them. It's, you hold me by my right hand. You guide me with your counsel. Then after all of that, a life where God is guiding you with his hand and counseling you with the knowledge of God, he would take you into glory. You will, you will, you will. This is C.S. Lewis learning to trace the beams of light back to the sun. This is Romans 1, acknowledging him as God. And when we do that, that ultimately leads to appreciation. Look what he continues, verse 25. Whom have I in heaven but you? And what a shift in perspective. And earth has nothing I desire but you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. He gets to this point where he has total clarity. He sees God. It wakes him up. He acknowledges that good things come from him. He appreciates what this is, and it ultimately leads into a sense of worship for who God is. As for me, it's good to be near God. I've made the sovereign Lord my refuge. I will tell of all your deeds. See, ultimately, attention is a cycle too. Attention functions much like distraction, but it leads to a different result. If we can go to that slide. Attention leads to awareness. Awareness leads to an acknowledgement of God. And an acknowledgement of God leads to appreciation for what he's done. And appreciation for what he's done leads to adoration for who he is. So the key then, next slide, seems to be that if you don't want to live in disillusionment, be aware of distraction. And if you want to live in adoration of God, pay attention to your attention, because this is the doorway to encounter. Attention leads to adoration. Okay, let's make this practical. How do we learn to pay attention to our attention? What's the art of moving from attention to adoration? Buechner says this. It seems to me, almost before the Bible says anything else, it's saying how important it is to be alive and to pay attention to being alive. Pay attention to each other. Pay attention to God as he moves and he speaks. Pay attention to where life or God has tried to take you. You have to learn to pay attention. So let's get back to the book Captivology that we mentioned at the start that talks about how to get someone, capture someone's attention. In that, he says there's basically 3 phases of getting attention and converting it to long-term appreciation. He talks about ignition, kindling, and bonfire. These are the 3 steps to making someone notice you, then getting them to keep paying attention to the miracle, and ultimately leading to the fire of God. This is my interpretation of his principles, by the way. Ignition is about our immediate attention. Kindling is about our short-term attention. And the bonfire is about our long-term attention and our values. So maybe you've heard this before, but several years ago, 7 years ago actually, we'd been in New York for a while, and my wife said, I've we didn't really leave Manhattan for 5 years. We just loved it so much. And then I started talking to church planters who'd been here forever, who I respected, and they were like, dude, you got to get off the island. The island this will become Jekyll Island. I mean, you got to get off this thing. I was like, really? What are you doing? He goes, go to a hotel in Pennsylvania, man. Just get out of here. So Christy said to me upon discussion in our marriage, she said, if you buy me a car, I'll live in New York the rest of my life. So I prayed, and someone gave us a car, which is better than buying one. Now, that was stolen and got in a high-speed police chase, and it was eventually reclaimed by the city and sold. But that's another story. But my point is, until the government has stolen one of your cars and auctioned it off, you're not a real New Yorker. So we buy a car. And then about a year later, Christy says, if this car drives to a place outside of New York for vacations, I will stay in New York the rest of my life. I was like, how far is this going to go? Turns out it just went that far. So we ended up buying a house in the middle of Nowheresville, Pennsylvania. A mountain home. Delightful. And it's the kind of place where you can get a mansion for nothing. And so we ended up getting a place there. And it's beautiful in the summer. It's wonderful. In the winter, it's basically Antarctica. It's horrific. And so I'm trying to come up with a cost-effective way of heating our house. So we've got gas, propane. Well, one winter, in my rookie home ownership state, I spent $1,000 heating the home, and we were there 4 days. It was just a lot. And then we've got electric heaters, which, as it turns out, are more expensive than propane. So I was like, there's got to be a better way. It's just like, you need to get a wood-burning stove. And I was like, gosh, that's fantastic. Why didn't I think of that earlier? Now, wood-burning stoves are fueled by wood. Electricity comes from a button. Propane comes from a truck. Wood comes from trees. And trees have to be chopped down and then chopped into pieces and all of that. Well, look at me, I don't really do that. So it's a lot more work than I thought. So I eventually talked some friends into chopping down trees and giving me the wood. Leadership, man, delegation. And then we get this stove installed, and I don't know how to light the stove. So I have to take a short class on stove lighting. And honestly, I mean, primal man, emerging from the primordial chaos with mammoths. What was it that set us apart? Fire. And you want to feel neutered as a man. It's like, I can't light a fire. I mean, it was just like awful. Men have been doing this for thousands of years, and me, I can't light a fire. So as it turns out, I take this class, and it's this process here. You have to get the thing started. And I can't tell you how embarrassing it was. I was like, has anyone got any matches? I was like, no. I was like, does anyone have a lighter? Like, nobody smokes. I'm like, I have a fireplace. I have wood. I have the fuel which you're not meant to use. I have everything, but I can't light the fire. Neighbors, excuse me, do you have a match I can borrow to heat my home? Embarrassing. Now I have lighters. So it turns out you have to light it a little bit, and then the goal once you ignite it is to get the kindling on it, right? And the kindling catches, and you're like, Father, in the name of Jesus, let the kindling catch. Holy Spirit, you are the fire of God. Show up. All of the exhortations. And then it catches, and you're like, yes, yes, yes. And then you get that moment where you take this one log that's been dried appropriately for a year or weathered or whatever, and you put it in, and then you see it catching, and you're just like, I am mad. Christy, come warm yourself by this fire, by the hearth that I've created. So she comes in, then you carefully place the logs in, and honestly, by the time it's done, you close the door, it warms 2,000 square feet. Proper stove, high end. What kind of man do you think I am? Brought a great one. Now, I say all this to say, this is what it's like in our relationship with God, okay? How do we get that first spark? Well, let me tell you how I do it, okay? And this is a practice that people have done for hundreds of years. Almost everything great that's happened in my life, every miracle has started as a spark that happens like this. At the end of every day, I sit with Jesus and I ask the Holy Spirit to speak to me about my day. And that's it. It's called the prayer of examine. And I just ask a couple of questions like, where did I feel closest to God today? Why? Where did I feel furthest away from God today? Why? What brought me joy today? Why? What hurt me today? Why? And what does this reveal to me? About who God is, about how life works, about who I am. And I'm telling you that this entire sermon that you're hearing tonight was from me sitting down saying, God, I can't read a chapter of a book anymore. I just noticed that I can't pay attention. I'm going to need you to redeem my attention span as a miracle. So it's just all these tiny little things. But you know what these are? These are the first piece of paper. This is the spark. It's the match. It's the lighter. Now, if you get an awareness of this, and this is where it becomes key to me, most people's lives are general Christian lives, okay? Now, I love a good general Christianity. I love truth. I love worship. I love the sacraments. I love the body of Christ. I love church history. I love general Christianity. But you are not called to a general faith. You're called to a personal faith. And so a lot of people try and build a bonfire on general revelation. And most people end up turning into Pharisees when they do that, because they're trying to encounter God where he's not meeting them. But if you will actually meet, if the fuel is what God is saying to you, you'd be amazed at how that will catch. And then after you get the initial spark, which is, Holy Spirit, what are you saying to me? You begin to put little bits of kindle on it. You don't put 2-hour prayer meetings. You do like 5 verses on a topic. Or you have a conversation with a friend on purpose about what you've learned. And you begin to gather, intentionally craft little bits of kindling, smaller little things around the spark that God's highlighted to you. And then this may lead you into a sense of awareness where you basically review your week and you review your month. And over the course of time, you begin to see there's actually a theme emerging here. And you know what I'm going to do with that theme? I'm going to start sticking logs of study and logs of spiritual disciplines and logs of focus onto this. And if you do that right, you're going to end up with a hearth in your soul that people around you will come out of the cold and be drawn to. And they'll say, can I warm my cold heart at the fire of devotion within your life? But it starts small. Holy Spirit, here's my day. What are you saying to me? We should all be able to ask what God's doing now. If you were to say to me right now, John, what is God doing in your life? I tell you right now, he's doing this and he's doing this. 2 themes in my life. Again and again and again, the Holy Spirit's highlighting. I'm in the process of building kindling, and I've got a few logs, but my life's not ready for them. Dump a log on a little tender kindling, it's like, dang it! Need that spark again. And you have to go back and clear it away. Too much too soon. But the right amount, based on the Spirit's attention and work, will transform your life. So you have a choice. You can get your eyes off God, like what happened to Asaph. You can get distracted, and then you'll get your life distorted. And this will lead to a point of discouragement that tempts you to disobedience. And disobedience brings death, it brings disillusionment. And then you'll look for a way out of it, a distraction from your disillusionment. And you'll just cycle deeper and deeper and further away from God. Next slide. Or you can pay attention to your attention and realize that attention leads to adoration. And this will cultivate an awareness of God, an acknowledgement of him in your life that leads to an appreciation of what he's done, that ultimately leads to a passion for who he is. Distraction leads to disillusionment, but attention leads to adoration. And so my practice for the week is very, very simple, is this. I want to challenge you to end your day by reviewing your day with God. That's it. That's the whole thing. Last week, pray what you've got. This week, end your day right. Super simple. So just pause for a moment. Noam Chomsky says the vision of modern man is an individual in a dark room, alone, looking at a screen. How do you end your day? Just try and get out of your own body. Try and see yourself. What are you doing to end your day? Are you like slapping your face so you can do one more episode? Worth it? Are you looking at inappropriate things on the internet? Are you with the wrong person? What are you doing at the end of your day? Just think, years of doing the wrong thing with your day, and I want you to imagine just closing your day out with Christ being with you. And just going through your day with him. Lord, you promised never to leave me or forsake me, so show me where you're with me and show me where I feel forsaken. Show me how you're there. And just go through your day. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a couple of questions. I just promise you, this is a tried and true practice in the church that I promise you that if you do this, things will emerge. You'll begin to see. And these will become the sparks that lead to kindling, that lead to logs, that lead to a fire in your soul. And this is possible for everybody. If the psalmist got disillusioned and distracted but found his way back, you can. Isn't this ultimately what happened to the prodigal son? Seriously? This is the cycle. Let's go back to the distraction. This is the cycle of the prodigal son. Got distracted by a far-off place, while living in prostitutes, got a distorted vision of who the father was, got discouraged that there was no place for him because he was the younger son, thought he was going to get shafted, disobeyed, and woke up in a pig pen. And what does it say? Came to his senses. Next slide. What happens? He paid attention. He had an awareness of who he was, and he began to acknowledge the kind of person his father was. It's led to an appreciation that led him home. So wherever you are, just change what you're looking at. And you'll be amazed to find that in your deepest disillusionment, the Father is paying attention to you. He's running down the road to welcome you home. And his vision is your life, a life on fire, filled with passion and purpose and life that gives light and warmth to those around. So let's close in prayer. And if you're here tonight, I want you to be able to, maybe this is your moment to respond. Maybe you're here tonight and you're like, you know, when you mentioned that disobedience stuff, that was me, man. I got my eyes off God and stuff got distorted and I got a beat down soul and I'm just not where I need to be. But I hear the voice of God. Tonight, this sermon, praise God, is a spark. You've got my attention, God. And if that's you tonight, I just want to pray for you specifically. So maybe just you want to respond to God however you know. Just lay your heart before him. Just make yourself consciously available to the presence of God. Bring yourself into his presence without shame or condemnation. Just be honest with who you are, where you are. And Father, I just want to say thank you for the honesty of my friends here tonight, Lord. Father, deep in our spirits, each of us, we want lives of just passionate devotion. We want to be caught up in wonder and awe and glory. But for some of us tonight, God, we feel so far away from that. And Father, I just pray that these words would be the spark of a new kind of movement in the heart and soul of my brothers and sisters here tonight. So Holy Spirit, I just pray, come and breathe life on that spark tonight. I just pray, wipe away the desires of the world. Remove any distortion, Lord God. Break off any distraction that's become a stronghold that's holding people back. And I pray, Lord, that you would just give them a vision of your great love, the mercy of Jesus, the kindness of your heart. And I just pray that they would head for home. So meet them tonight, Lord, sitting in this seat in this high school in the middle of New York City. May this be the pathway, the gateway to heaven, that you're here and they know it. Lord, for those like me who realize that it's just hard to pay attention, I just pray that you will literally help us to learn to cultivate our attention, our imagination towards you. Help us to watch the notifications, Lord, to reset what we're allowing into our lives. Lord, we know that you have this incredible capacity to move people out of disillusionment and into life. And so we just pray that you would do that for our church. Just move us deeper, Lord. Help us to see you, to be aware of your movements in our lives. And we just pray that when our lives are on fire, Lord, that they would bring life and heat and joy to this city. So Holy Spirit, we just offer ourselves to you as a church body. We make ourselves available to your presence, and we consciously choose to fix our eyes on Jesus. And it's in his name we pray. Amen. I want you to